I'm just going to say up front that global Anglican political machinations are not really my area of expertise, but here we are on YouTube. Haste is the name of the game. And so I wanted to create a video first to kind of caution my audience from buying in too much to hastily made videos from other channels, particularly ones that have more of a agenda going on. I think, for example, the Ready to Harvest guy had a video turned around pretty quick. He very carefully says the date in it, which is interesting. But he basically is giving a whole lot of airtime to the GAFCON point of view and doesn't really give a whole lot of emphasis on the Anglican Communion. I know a lot of people think of him as fair and balanced. I just think of some of the videos of his I come across, while they are very like calmly presented, he definitely to me seems to want to give more credence to more kind of conservative traditionalist expressions of Christianity and seems to love to bring out the Episcopal Church to throw it under the bus as much as possible. But, you know, I guess if you do it calm and collected, that's fair and balanced. I also think of like a video that Redeemed Zoomer Richard made when the Archbishop of Canterbury was named. I've had Richard on here. I only watched like a minute of that video because as soon as he said that the Archbishop of Canterbury is basically like the Pope of Anglicanism, I stopped watching because that's silly and that's not true. And anybody who knows a bit of anything about global Anglicanism today would know that the role of the Archbishop of Canterbury is not like the Pope, other than maybe in a very broad sense of ideally being an office of unity. So again, stop watching these people. Instead, I think there are way more thoughtful people out there who can help you to understand these things. But the thing is most of them are not here on YouTube. They're writing blog posts or publishing like in the Living Church. So the two things I want to point you to today are one, an article from Andrew McGowen, who was on the show to talk about the Archbishop of Canterbury. He is the Dean of Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. He's originally from the Anglican Church of Australia and just really thoughtful. He wrote a piece called No, the Global South Has Not Left the Anglican Communion. The link is in the video description. The other thing I think is worth reading comes from, again, the Living Church, from Mark Michael. I think that's his name. He's the editor-in-chief, and it's entitled Analysis GAFCON Creates Global Anglican Communion. Now, to just offer you a bit about what's in each of these things to drive you to read more, is in the piece by Dean McGowen. I think what's important is, and I'm going to read some lines from it, is he says that part of the DNA of Anglicanism is the autonomy of national churches. So I think that's important to know because in a lot of the comments I'm seeing is people, again, seem to think that the Archbishop of Canterbury kind of serves as some Pope of Anglicanism, and that just isn't true. Like the Archbishop of Canterbury doesn't have any authority over, say, churches in the Episcopal Church here in the United States, or over churches in the Church of Nigeria, or over, you know, the Anglican Church in South Africa, right? Each of those are a national church that have their own autonomy. They have their own bishops and primate, or however they want to structure themselves. That's just part of the DNA of Anglicanism. And so to have a number of churches break ties with, say, the See of Canterbury is a different thing than, say, if there was a large swath of the Roman Catholic Church that disaffiliated from Rome, because the structure of the Anglican Communion is not like the Catholic Church. It's different. They are autonomous national churches. Dean McGowen goes on to write that when the Anglican Communion later emerged as a whole family of such national churches, and not just as the colonial offshoots of one, that means the Church of England, this principle of autonomous national churches was firmly upheld. The first Lambeth Conference was brought together in 1867 on the strict understanding that neither the Archbishop of Canterbury personally, nor even this group of bishops could usurp the authority that properly belonged to the bishops in their own sphere. Primacy and collegiality were strictly limited as means of determining the mind of the church. So, in other words, from the beginning of the first Lambeth Conference, which one could argue really kind of gives birth to what we understand as the Anglican Communion. It was very clear that the point of this gathered body was to work together, was for things like collegiality and things like that, but it wasn't meant to create an overarching structure that would then have authority over the member churches. I think that's key. And in a lot of the chatter I'm seeing in places like Reddit, comments on here and stuff, and who even knows what people are saying on Twitter, the Anglican Communion is not a denomination in the proper sense of that, right? If a church denomination is a body that accepts one form of like discipline, law, polity, canon, the Anglican Communion is not that, because each national church and province that constitutes part of the Anglican Communion has its own autonomy, right? It sets its worship life, it sets its canons, and while they participate in the Anglican Communion, it's not a denominational structure. It's not a top-down structure at all. Okay, right? And that was clear in that first Lambeth Conference, that in coming together, they weren't creating a superstructure like a worldwide Anglican church as a formal denominational structure. So Dean McGowen goes on to observe, it is thus odd to read the Archbishop of Rwanda, the Most Reverend Dr. Laurent Mabanda, and if I'm mispronouncing his name, please forgive me, that it's odd to read Archbishop Mabanda proclaiming new arrangements for the Anglican Communion, or rather the creation of a new entity called the Global Anglican Communion, on behalf of a whole set of national churches who, as far as we can tell, have not actually made their own decisions about this. In other words, it's kind of odd to have this one archbishop of a particular country making a pronouncement on behalf of other national churches because they are autonomous, right? Each of those churches would have to make a decision about whether or not they're going to break whatever ties they have to Canterbury or the Anglican Communion and to realign themselves with this new global Anglican Communion, right? One person cannot make that pronouncement for the member churches. The Archbishop of Canterbury could not have made any kind of pronouncement like that for the member churches of the Anglican Communion. So it's odd to see Archbishop Mabanda trying to do this for the GAFCON churches. It's odd, right? It's creating the global Anglican Communion to do something different than what the Anglican Communion was set up to do. Okay, so Dean McGowen goes on to say, Archbishop Mabanda's communique stated both that the new global entity constituted the restoration of the, quote, original structure as a fellowship of autonomous provinces, end quote, but awkwardly to say the least, then clearly dismissed any respect for autonomy of provinces by declaring from on high that its members, quote, shall not participate in meetings called by the Archbishop of Canterbury, including the ACC, which is the Anglican Consulting Commission, I think, and shall not make any monetary contributions to the ACC, nor receive any monetary contributions from the ACC or its network. So again, going back to what the Anglican Communion was set up to be in that first Lambeth Conference was that it wasn't meant to usurp power from the autonomous national churches. But in this very communique, to try to establish a global Anglican Communion, Archbishop Mabanda is kind of saying things that are at odds with each other. On the one hand, he is trying to claim that they are restoring the original structure as a fellowship of autonomous provinces, while at the same time trying to create a top-down authoritarian role for maybe himself or whoever would become the archbishop or archprimate or head person of that new global Anglican Communion. You can't have it both ways. You can't say you're restoring a fellowship to what it was meant to be, respecting the autonomy of the member churches, while at the same time proclaiming from on high what those autonomous national churches should do, right? That's taking away their autonomy. So again, I think you should go and read Dean Andrews' piece. I think what it really starts to point to is that the global Anglican Communion, if that does in fact come into existence, is to create something that has not existed before, and that is a worldwide Anglican denomination, right? So like the Anglican Communion is a way for all those member churches to affiliate with one another and work together and have collegiality, but it does not create a governing body over them. And I think that's part of what made folks in GAFCON uneasy, is because there was no way for the Anglican Communion to discipline member churches that they felt were no longer keeping to basic Christian teachings. So now they're going to create a global Anglican Communion in which more conformity is going to be expected of the member churches. It will probably have a more authoritarian structure, but with that, there's a trade-off. That means that those formerly autonomous churches will have to give away some of their autonomy to this global Anglican Communion in order to be able to be placed under discipline or place others under discipline. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, or whether that takes form, because there have been members of GAFCON who have been perfectly happy to maintain a degree of relationship with the See of Canterbury, with the Anglican Communion, with the Church of England. And so, right, if there was a Venn diagram, so to speak, of which there are like GAFCON and the Anglican Communion, and there were some churches that have nothing to do with GAFCON but are in the Anglican Communion, and some churches in GAFCON that have nothing to do with the Anglican Communion, I think I said that right. There were some that were participating in both. And now Archbishop Mabanda in this communique has drawn a line in the sand and said, no, you can't do that, which is quite a claim to authority that he's making in this communique. So we'll see if the other participants in GAFCON really buy into that, because the thing in his communique that's really worth noting is his is the only name on it. So we'll see. The other piece is from the Living Church, Mark Michael. I did get that right. It's an analysis entitled GAFCON Creates Global Anglican Communion. He goes over some of the things that same stuff of kind of summarizing what Archbishop Mubanda has stated in this. I think where his analysis is also worth reading and is different than Dean McGowen's is that he gets more into some of the politics in kind of the broader, what's sometimes called the global south of the Anglican Communion, or worldwide Anglicanism, that they are not all of one mind. And again, this is not my expertise, and so this is even harder for me to summarize. So I just encourage you to read it. I think what I found interesting, because I don't really know much about this stuff, is that in addition to GAFCON, there's another group called the Global South Fellowship of Anglicans. And those two groups do have some overlap, but they're not the same. There was some overtures to kind of incur from GAFCON to say, hey, let's merge into one thing. And the GSFA politely declined. And while GAFCON was initially set up to be a renewal movement, it's really this GSFA and creating a covenantal structure that was trying to do more of the doctrine and discipline stuff. And so it'll be interesting to see whether with this communique from Archbishop Mabanda, if he's kind of overstepped and tried to stake out that kind of alternative communion territory to try to outmaneuver GSFA, who was kind of doing some of that work to begin with. I do think what's interesting in Mark Michael's piece is that, right, that GAFCON has stated that the future has arrived. And if I'm reading Reverend Michael's piece here, is I think he finds that a bit overstated. He ends with this: if GAFCON is right, that with this announcement, the future has arrived for Anglicans, the future may indeed be just as confusing as the present. All this is to say is that Archbishop Mabanda is part of this group, but he is one person. And as far as like what informed this most recent communique that he has published and has grabbed splashy headlines about a fracture in the Anglican Communion, I mean, I do think a fracture has happened. But as far as like how many pieces we're breaking into, I think is unclear. I think who's going to be aligned where is also to be determined. And you know, I was a United Methodist pastor. I left that body in part because I was not at all interested in going through the grief of a church split. So it is uncomfortable to be here. But again, I don't know that it has much impact on the day-to-day workings of the Episcopal Church here in the United States, or certainly my parish. But I also just think it would be way more charitable and way more Christian, honestly, to stop trying to draw these lines in the sand. I mean, right, if we've been living with this kind of Venn diagram where these autonomous national churches have been able to affiliate with the Anglican Communion, with GAFCON, with this GSFA, If those autonomous churches are given that kind of autonomy to find ways of aligning together to find common cause on mission, collegiality, or even doctrine and structure, like, more power to them. I don't know why, like, I don't know what's to be gained in trying to like pull apart these Venn diagrams and then make people choose like which of these affiliations they're going to be in. But I'd love to know what your questions are. I know this is a bit muddled. This is not my area of expertise. I do hope to get some people on who know more about this than I do. So I want to know, what are your questions about this GAFCON announcement? What are you wanting to understand about global Anglicanism and what these announcements mean? Can you put your questions in the comments, and I will try to put them to people who know more than I do. But in the meantime, go read those two wonderful pieces, the one by Dean McGowen, the other one by Reverend Michael. They're in the comments. I think they're worth your time, and those are worth paying attention to, rather than people just, trying to get more clicks and views on their YouTube channel, which, yes, I am trying to do, but I'm also trying to point you to what I think is slower, more informed, and more deliberate thinking around these things. So thank you for watching. Take care, and God bless.